What's up, witches? My name is Syzygy, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, then hi, hello, nice to have you. A little while ago, I posted a poll in my community tab, which you should totally keep up with if you're interested in updates on how I'm doing on a video, or if you want to say in what kind of video I do next. I asked you all which topic you would like me to cover first, and most of you selected the story about my crazy ex-friend. Now, if you are one of the people who wanted any of the other video topics, then you're still in luck because I will get to doing them at some point in the future. Don't worry, I'll also be doing the old art deep dive part 2 as well, where I discuss the comic that I mentioned in part 1. And that video will probably be the one that I do after this one, if not for the Q&A. So stay tuned if you were one of the people who asked for that. Furthermore, before we get into today's topic, I just wanted to thank you all for your support, as I just reached 1,000 subscribers recently, and I still appreciate every single one of you from the bottom of my heart. Like, okay, I'm going off script here a little bit, but it means so much to me. I never thought that I would get here this fast. I originally wanted to do a Q&A video to celebrate, but when I asked for y'all to lay some questions on me, I only got like 5 questions, all on Instagram. So I'm not sure if I'll actually get to make that video, being that it wouldn't be very long at all if I did. However, if you guys still want to see a questions and answers video from me, then I ask you to please write your questions in the comment section below using the hashtag SyzygyQA. I don't really care what they are, whether they're about art, about my channel, about my personal preferences towards something, or even more personal than that. I will answer every single one, let me tell you. As long as they're not hateful or about personal identifying information, of course. So if you want to see the Q&A video in question, comment your questions below, again using hashtag SyzygyQA. Even if I do not get enough questions and decide not to make the video, I'll just answer your questions anyway in the comments below, so if you have something you want to know, it will be answered. Alright, as for right now, allow me to dive into the story of my crazy ex-friend from grade school, as you all voted for. So as a kid, I never really fit in with the crowd. I know it's probably cliche as all hell, like every YouTuber has the same backstory, but it's true. I was a really socially awkward kid who never really got along with anyone from day 1 of school. I actually didn't know about this until middle school rolled around because my mom just never mentioned it to me. But when I was young, I was taken to 2 separate child psychologists who, after evaluating me, said I likely had autism spectrum disorder. I just don't remember this because I was really young. They asked my mom if she wanted to get me further evaluated, tested, and then have the ASD put on my record, but my mom refused the diagnosis because she worried that I would be placed in special education. And thank you, Mom. Glad I did not end up in special education. Especially in my school district, it was a pretty ableist environment. So with that whole thing being the case, I was obviously very socially challenged. I did not like my peers, and I didn't really make an effort to like them until a lot later in my school career. So for the first 2 years of school, that being kindergarten and 1st grade respectively, I pretty much had no friends. On the playground, I would bring a book outside and read, or occasionally I would walk around and talk to myself out loud because, yes, I did that and still do that to this day. I vocal stim constantly, don't come for me. Let me self-soothe. Anyway, I wasn't actually bullied or picked on directly or anything. In fact, in all honesty, I was a relatively mean kid, and if someone were to make the smallest insult in my direction, that was fighting words. I didn't really put up with crap from others and was not really afraid of confrontation the way that I am now. Therefore, I was quietly ostracized, if that makes sense. People just didn't talk to me and just thought I was weird. Pretty sure all of the shit talking was done behind my back. And you know what? I was actually weirdly sort of fine with it. Again, I didn't like my peers and was not really interested in having people like me or be my friend. This is not to say that I was like completely alone. There were people that were nice to me or that I talked to occasionally, they just weren't close friends at all. Now, this all changed for me when 2nd grade rolled around and I met a girl that I'll call Jay for the sake of this story. From what I understand, Jay was not actually going to my elementary school for kindergarten or 1st grade. Instead, she actually moved there that year from Arkansas and was like the new girl in town for a while. At the time, I didn't really pay much attention to the inner workings of my classmates' social sphere because I couldn't give less of a fuck, to tell you the truth. But looking back on it, Jay instantly ended up being labeled as one of the weird kids by most people, and she did not make many friends outside of others who were already in like the general group of weird kids. You know that group of weird kids. She first sort of attached herself to me like a barnacle, sometime in like the first 2 weeks of the school year. I actually remember this interaction relatively clearly. I was sitting at the desk in front of hers in class, and Jay dropped her eraser, and I remember it rolled down beside my chair, and when I noticed it, I picked it up for her. You know, Good Samaritan business. But this is the one time I regret being a Good Samaritan, because when I picked it up and turned around to hand her back her eraser, she took it from me with one of the creepiest, widest smiles I have ever seen. And from that day forward, it seemed like me handing her back her eraser was like a sort of invitation to follow me around everywhere, at least in her mind. She started talking to me in class and then, you know, would get me in trouble because we were talking while the teacher was talking, just because her desk was so close to mine. For each group project, she would pick me relatively immediately. She also sat directly beside me every circle time, and worst of all, she always wanted to touch me. I have like a slight touch aversion if the person touching me is either unfamiliar or is someone that I don't like. And she always wanted to hold my hand and touch my hair, and during the circle time I mentioned, she always made damn sure to sit close enough to where our knees touched. It drove me insane. I told her on several occasions that I didn't want to be touched. Hell, one time I even said, and I quote, "I do not like you and do not want to be your friend," to her at one point. Like, I said that directly to her. But even with me being so direct, she could not take a hint. Well, it wasn't even really a hint, it was just a flat-out statement, and she just couldn't get it through her thick skull. I remember, like, every time I got upset with her, she would just kind of laugh at me and be like, "Haha, funny joke, you silly goose," and like punch me in the shoulder. She also had like no respect for my personal belongings at all, which also drove me insane because, you know, autistic protectiveness and order go burr. She would touch my pencils and pens and take things from my backpack without asking and then justify it with, "We're friends, so you share." Probably the worst experiences that I had from this was when she would always want to wear my hat and my shoes. Now, I have no clue why she always wanted to wear my shoes because, one, we were different shoe sizes. Her feet were smaller than mine. And two, the shoes that I wore were black flats, probably bought at Walmart because I am poor. I'm still poor. So the shoes themselves weren't particularly fancy or interesting to a kid. The worst part of it was that she always wore the most uncomfortable flip-flop sandal things that I have ever worn in my entire life. They were Monster High themed and they were like flip-flops but also platforms. So not only was I having to take off my socks all the time as to wear these platform too small for my feet flip-flops, but also I am a relatively foot-repulsed person. To this very day, I don't even like looking at my own feet. I am always wearing socks 24/7 because I cannot bear to be barefoot. And let me just tell ya, just looking at or even thinking about other people's feet, I like that even less than I like thinking about my own. And the act of wearing her nasty, sweaty, barefoot sandals just thinking about it today makes me feel so squicky. Like, I'm recording this and I literally just shivered in my chair. At the time, I told her straight up that I did not want to switch shoes in the slightest. But when I did, she got all mad at me and then guilt-tripped me into doing it. And this was the same case with this one hat that I used to wear. The hat was not a ball cap, but was instead this soft white hat with a bill that was also covered in silver sequins. A relatively ugly hat, I digress, but young me had no idea what fashion was, and the sequins made me happy, so shh. Jay always wanted to wear this hat every time I brought it to school, and the only way I ever got her to stop was to lie to her and tell her that I had head lice so she would drop it and stop asking. And I remember when I first told her, she was like, "So?" Like, she doesn't care about getting head lice, she just wants to wear my sequin hat that bad, what the fuck? Aside from the whole, you know, breaching my territory thing, she would constantly make fun of my weight as well. In grade school, I was a bit chubby. I wasn't really fat, and probably wasn't even technically overweight, like in terms of BMI, but I was certainly chubby, especially in the face. It was something that I was and still am sort of insecure about. Like, even to this day, I still ain't the skinniest, but it was definitely more noticeable when I was young. I remember very clearly she would make fun of me when I ran, like, outside, and one time when I drew this self-portrait of myself for a school assignment, she said that it was unrealistic because I made myself too skinny. Thanks, Jay, for the body dysmorphia. I really appreciate that. She also had this like real penchant for inviting herself to places where she was not wanted, and one of these places was my house. So she would always pressure me to ask my mom if she could come over to my house on the weekends, and if I like didn't ask her or if the answer was no too often, Jay would get really upset and then start guilt-tripping me until the answer eventually became yes. And why did I not want her to come to my house so much, besides just the general dislike of her? Well, because, oh boy, every time she came over to my house, it was awful. She would mess up my Barbies and Monster High dolls every single time. So like, I had this big bookshelf in my bedroom where I had created different scenes on different shelves with my dolls. I had a lot of stands for them and would place them in intricate scenes with each other, sitting at tables, standing around with drinks, all that kind of sort of stuff. And I had a bunch of props for them, so I rarely ever played with them. They were more of a display for me. Every time she came over though, she would take them off the shelf and knock things over, destroying my hard work and my scenes! So much for a territorial autistic child to handle, I swear. I remember spending an hour or more putting everything back in its proper place, like every time she left. Oh my god. Not only that, but like every time she came over, she would eat everything in her house. Okay, well, that was a little bit of an exaggeration. She wouldn't eat everything, but she would eat all of our snack food. I remember this specific incident in which my mum baked a tray of cookies, gave me and Jay one each, and then told us to leave the rest of the cookies alone so that my stepdad could eat his when he came home. And after Jay left that day, Mum discovered that there were 3 or 4 cookies missing that neither I nor my siblings took. So there's that. This is now probably a good time to mention that my mum didn't like her either. She could sense that I was not a fan of Jay's and was definitely on my side in terms of the issue. She told me later when I asked down the line that she didn't intervene in our friendship at all or tell me to get her to piss off because she knew that I didn't have many other friends at the time, so she just sort of had to grin and bear it. Now, at the end of 2nd grade year, Jay didn't know my phone number or have any contact info of mine, so she couldn't really talk to me over the summer. And going into the 3rd grade, we did not have a class together, and our lunch periods were separate. So we talked very little that year. I can't even remember a singular interaction that we had, to be honest. It was that year that I ended up becoming friends with 2 girls that I'll call Aya and Macy for this story. The following year, Aya and Macy were both in my 4th grade class, but Jay wasn't. However, she did have the same lunch period as us this time, and she would often follow the 3 of us around the playground at lunchtime. And we were all annoyed by her, but none of us really bothered to be direct about it. We just kind of avoided her the whole year because every time we confronted her about something, it would turn into this huge argument, like she was crazy. I remember this one instance where we were playing on the blacktop outside with a basketball, and when Aya, stole the ball from her, because we were playing basketball, you know, she got really upset and started, throwing a hissy fit about it, so mostly we just tried not to confront her about anything. 5th grade, I spoke to Jade not at all for most of it. We had the same lunch period again, but I did not have any of the same classes as her. However, despite our lunch period overlap, we didn't really talk much at all. I'm pretty sure she found new people to torment. The only thing of note at all was, in the last 2 weeks before the summer, Jay came up to me on the playground and briefly introduced me to the person that would later become my ex-partner down the line in middle school. I'll just call them Sam for this story. Now, going into my first year of middle school, 6th grade, things were a lot more difficult. I did not have Aya in any of my classes, and Macy had decided to be friends with these preppy girls and started ignoring both me and Aya entirely. In 2 or 3 of my classes at the time, however, I had Jay, and so we pretty much quickly became friends again, entirely against my will. Despite me not really being enthusiastic about the friendship, she was a lot more bearable at this point in time, though still annoying, but bearable. I was pretty desperate for friends at this point, so I just sort of accepted her into my life again without too much fuss. She soon reintroduced me to Sam, and the 3 of us got to know each other very well. I wasn't all that close with Jay, even to this day, but I bonded with Sam quite a lot during 6th grade year, and the 2 of us became extremely close. Not only that, but through Sam, I ended up actually being accepted into the emo/weird kid group, and made friends that I still had until I moved out of my hometown freshman year of high school. Back to Jay though, as I said, she was a little bit more mature and bearable now, but the child still had no concept of boundaries and still did the whole same inviting herself to my house sort of thing. One time, I remember the power went out at my house in January, and they couldn't get it fixed for a whole week, so I was really stressed about it. And she still wanted to come over to my house and pestered the shit out of me over it. And then when I yelled at her and then told her she couldn't come over because the fucking power was off, she flipped her fucking shit. I don't know. It was crazy. Mostly there weren't really any incidents worth mentioning besides that, except for this one time where she got my mom really upset at me. This particular time when she invited herself over, we didn't have any snacks in the house and Jay kept complaining about it, so my mom handed us a $20 bill to shut her up. She told us we could go to the little Mexi Mart across the street to get some things, and then told us to only use $10 of the 20. At the time, she didn't have a 10, 5s, or even 1s, so we were essentially trusted exhausted and expected to heed her warnings and only spend 10. So we crossed the street and picked up our snacks at the store. If I remember correctly, I picked out a large soda and a candy, and she grabbed like several different things, like I don't know how many. When we got up to the counter to pay, like the total ended up being $19 and something. So I looked over at her and told her that she needed to put a couple things back so we wouldn't go over the total, and she threw a huge pissy fit over it. She would not listen to me, and I didn't really want to hold up the line for very long, so I ended up putting back both my things and apologizing to the cashier guy for the inconvenience. However, even despite me putting back both of my things and letting her walk away with like, I don't know, 5 or 6, we still ended up spending about $15, and when we got back to the house, my mom was pissed at me for it until after Jay left when I could explain the whole thing to her. At that point, nothing between me and Jay really happened that is of note. However, at the end of 6th grade year, she had to move back to Arkansas with her mom and brother. From what I heard, it was to be closer to family. I haven't heard from her since, and I am honestly glad to be rid of her because, oh boy. But just because I haven't spoken to her in a long time, it doesn't mean that I'm not without one last update on her. So during that summer, Sam and I started dating, and we would meet at this park that was relatively close to both of our houses, and we would hang out there. One time when we were at this park, Sam told me that they heard something pretty crazy about Jay. Apparently, Jay threatened her younger brother with a knife and ended up in an institution. I don't exactly know how true that is, necessarily, but I wouldn't be surprised, and honestly, I don't really know why Sam would lie about that. Honestly, it's pretty crazy to think about it though, assuming that it is true. So glad that I never ended up getting stabbed, I guess. So looking back on it, is there really anything to be gleaned or learned from this experience? I mean, kind of. I sort of wish I had been more assertive during that time. I may have been direct at first, but I eventually ended up just giving in and letting Jay get away with whatever she wanted to do because I thought confrontation with her would just end in dismissiveness or a headache. Or maybe, perhaps if I was mean enough, I could have ended up being stabbed, I don't know. Anyway, I hope you get a kick out of this story and enjoyed it. Remember to comment using the hashtag #SyzyGQA if you want to ask me a question and perhaps be featured in an upcoming Q&A video if it happens. Besides that, if you have your own personal experiences with a crazy friend that you want to share, kind of something similar, I love reading stories like this, and you could leave a comment about that experience if you'd like. With that being said, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like or even subscribe if you feel so inclined. I hope you have a nice rest of your day, and don't forget to stay magical.